Welcome back. Today we're going to continue our discussion about how offspring are like their parents. And remember that offspring just means young plants or animals. So let's look at this picture. Let's compare and contrast the way that the young tiger cub and its parent are alike and different. So what are some similarities that you see? How are they alike? What are some differences that you see? How are they different? Our first vocabulary word is traits, and traits are personal characteristics. Your traits are things about you, like how you look or what you like. So characteristics and traits mean the same thing. A characteristic of an organism can either be inherited or acquired, and those are our two important words. So you are unique. There is nobody else in this world like you. And your characteristics are called your traits. So, for example, your eye color, whether or not you possess skills to play basketball, those are your traits. So, inherited traits. Inherited means that you receive them from your parents. So, you receive these traits through the DNA and the sperm and egg cells from your parents. And these examples are your natural eye color, your natural hair color, your height, and your blood type. So here are some examples of inherited traits. These are the traits, again, that you get from your parents. Your eye color, your hair color, your skin color, your height, your foot size, whether you have any moles, birthmarks, or freckles, and any diseases or conditions that you were born with. On the other hand, is acquired traits. These develop during your life. You are not born with these. Acquired traits are things that you learn, such as riding a bike, reading a book, or writing your name. Acquired traits are also things that happen to you. If you cut your hair, you weren't born with short hair. It happened to you, you cut it. Or if you unfortunately cut off a finger, it happened to you. So some more examples of learned traits: your mannerisms, your language. If you speak more than one language, you were not born speaking two languages. You had to learn those. Your religion, your food preferences, what you like and you don't like. Your music preferences, what music you like, what music you don't like, and your favorite sport. So acquired traits end with you. They're not passed on. Your acquired traits are not in your DNA. And as an example, if you're missing an arm, if you cut off an arm, your kids are not going to be born with a missing arm because that's not in their DNA. However, some traits can be both. Skin color is a combination trait. So the inherited part of the trait, you receive the genes for your skin color from your parents, but your acquired trait is the amount of time that you spend in the sun that determines your level of tan. So let's look at some pictures. Dimples. Are dimples acquired or inherited? Dimples are an inherited trait. This child got the genes that her parents gave her, and they were dimples. Let's look at some more examples. Someone is bilingual, so they speak two languages. What about knowing how to swim? Is that inherited or acquired? How about having a hitchhiker's thumb, just like the picture here? Is that inherited or acquired? What about a man being blind from a fireworks accident? Is that learned or is that inherited? How about Sarah, who can roll her tongue? Is that something she learned or something she inherited from her parents? How about having calluses on the bottom of your feet? Are those acquired or inherited? What about a pea plant having purple flowers? Is that a learned trait or an acquired or a learned or inherited trait? How about Harry Potter having a scar on his head? Was that acquired or inherited? And bushes having trimmed limbs. Is that an acquired trait or an inherited trait? All right, we are going to watch a brain pop video about genetics and also one about heredity.
I don't know. Maybe the father was a tabby. Dear Tim and Moby, both my parents have brown eyes and I have blue eyes. How can that happen? From Emily P. Well, this is just a guess, but I'll bet one of your grandparents has blue eyes. Stop that. The color of your eyes is a factor of heredity, the passing down of physical traits from parents to children. That includes things like hair type, eye color, bone structure, and even parts of your personality. These traits are carried in our genes. Genes are made up of DNA, which stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. DNA is arranged in pairs of strands called chromosomes. In humans, there are 23 pairs of chromosomes in each cell. That's 46 chromosomes in all. Just about every cell in your body has these 46 chromosomes in it. You can think of them as a computer program for your body. Because everybody's different, no two sets of DNA are alike. You get your genes from your parents, 23 chromosomes from your mother and 23 chromosomes from your father. Your parents got their genes from their parents, and so on. The genes from your parents combine to form your genes. Organisms that reproduce sexually, like people, have special cells just for making offspring. In animals, male sex cells are called sperm, and female sex cells are eggs. Sex cells are special because they have only a half set of genes. If your mother has brown eyes and your father has blue eyes, the chances are your eyes will be brown. This is because the genes that code for blue eyes are recessive, and the genes that code for brown eyes are dominant. That means that in most cases, the gene for brown eyes will block out the gene for blue eyes. You still have the blue-eyed genes in your DNA, they're just not expressing themselves. By the same logic, two parents with brown eyes might be carrying recessive blue-eyed genes. If a sperm containing this recessive gene comes together with an egg containing the recessive gene, the brown-eyed parents can make a blue-eyed baby. Really? Huh. Well, I guess you're right. Moby says that the genetic process that determines your eye color is a little bit more complicated than this. It actually involves several genes, not just one. But it's a good example of how traits are passed down from generation to generation. Of course, it's important to remember that genes don't determine everything. What we look like is largely determined by the genes we inherit, but factors like environment and nutrition can play a role too. For example, modern humans are taller on average than our ancestors because of better nutrition. But it's hard to overestimate how much our genes shape who we are. Are my parents nerds? Well, my dad, why do you ask?
All right. So let's go back and discuss some of those vocabulary words that you just saw in the video. So two words that were discussed are dominant and recessive. Dominant is a gene that's more often expressed and it overrides the recessive gene. So it's stronger. So only one copy of the dominant gene needs to be present in order for it to be dominant. On the other hand, recessive is a gene that can be carried in a person's genes without appearing. But for a recessive trait to appear, there has to be two copies, one from each parent of that gene. So for example, here are some examples of some dominant and recessive traits. On the left-hand side of your screen, you have the dominant traits. That is a dark hair color, brown eyes, facial features such as dimples and freckles are dominant. Being right-handed is dominant. Having curly hair is also dominant. In dogs, having wiry hair. In cats, short hair. And in garden pea plants, having a tall stem. Now, on the right-hand side, you have the recessive. In hair color, red or blonde hair is considered recessive. Eye color, green, hazel, or blue. Facial features, if you have thin lips, those are more recessive. Being left-handed is recessive. Having straight hair is a recessive trait. In dogs, having smooth hair. Cats, long hair. And in garden peas, having a short stem. So let's watch another Brain Pop video about heredity and see what they're talking about with the pea plants.
Dear Tim and Moby, my parents both have brown eyes, but mine are blue. What's going on? From Tyra. Well, I bet there are blue-eyed people somewhere in your family tree. Eye color is just one of many physical traits we inherit from our parents. That passing of traits from parents to offspring is known as heredity. But remember that parents inherit traits from their parents, and so on, as far back as your family tree can go. Let's look at some pea plants to see how it all works. Yes, pea plants. Every living thing inherits traits. Back in the 1800s, a monk named Gregor Mendel used pea plants to study how traits like height, color, and shape are inherited. When Mendel crossed short plants with tall plants, he noticed that only tall plants were produced. Whatever produced these short plants seemed to disappear. Mendel called that tall height trait the dominant factor because it dominated or covered up the short height form. He called the short height trait the recessive factor. By the second generation of pea plants, those recessive short plant forms cropped up again. After tons of research, Mendel was able to predict that, on average, 1 out of every 4 pea plants would be short. Each plant has 2 genes that determine height. The tall gene, represented here by a capital T, is dominant, which means it only takes 1 of these genes to make a plant tall. It takes 2 short genes, represented by a lowercase t, to make a plant short. In the 19th century, a British geneticist named Reginald Punnett also experimented with peas and developed something called the Punnett square. Among other things, this Punnett square lets you predict the likelihood of what you would get if you crossed a tall plant with a short plant. An offspring gets 1 gene from each parent, either a tall or a short gene. Each plant produced by these 2 plants will be tall because each one has one of those dominant tall genes. But what happens if 2 of these new plants produce offspring? There are lots of ways this could turn out, but the most likely result is that we get 3 tall plants and 1 short one. Mendel only figured this stuff out after carefully studying 30,000 individual pea plants over an 8-year period. Well, I guess it's pretty reasonable to assume that he had peas for dinner every night. I think you're missing the point. Moby? Moby?
All right. I know this has been a lot of information, but now it is time for you to show us what you know. Here is your Kahoot pin. So go show us what you know. Feel free to go back through the video. We'll see you later.